Everything you always wanted to know about Reconstructionism, but were afraid to ask. I'm John Riehl. I'm been a long-time Oseh Shalom member. I mean, all of you already know that. I've been on the Reconstructionist board of the movement since 1996 and the college board since 2010. I know that is a little opaque right now, but at the end of this course, you'll understand exactly what that means and be the synagogue experts on Reconstructionism. I've got a lot of PowerPoint slides that I'm going to be showing, but this is a really interactive discussion. I'll be talking, but anytime anybody has any questions or comments, please, interrupt. You're not going to upset me if you interrupt or have a question. We have two sessions that we're going to be doing. One is today till about 11:30, and the other one will be June 4th at 10 o'clock from 11:30.
Here's this.
What?
Okay, you gonna leave it there?
Yeah.
Can you see me or hear me?
Ryan, if you could, what I'm going to ask people to do is introduce themselves, and then I could ask the people on Zoom if you could mute, and if you have a question, though, just unmute and say, "Hey, John, I have a question," or "I have a comment." So, first of all, we'll go around the table, and I would ask people at the table to speak up a little because I'm not sure how well the microphone will pick up. But I'm John Riehl.
I'm Ronnie Brown.
I'm Katie Clemens.
Tim Watkins.
Andy Lincoln.
Marsha Dresner.
Helen's not here.
And Helen Land will be coming in soon. So how about the folks on Zoom?
Hi, this is Retha on Brian H's.
Hi, Retha.
Here comes Nikki. Hi, John.
From iPhone set to everyone, set on Zoom.
Seth Eaton is on Zoom.
Hi, Jessica Jacobs.
Hi, Jessica. Welcome.
Doris
Hi, I'm
Owen. Oh, sorry.
I heard Doris Kirschbaum's voice.
Right. That's me.
And who is the other person that was speaking?
Hi, I'm Lynn Owens. I'm new.
Could you say your name again? You were cut out a little bit.
Sure. Lynn Owens.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi.
Oh, they can't see me.
Hi, Jessica McKinney Land here.
Hi, Jessica.
Hey, John.
Is that it?
No, Nikki just.
Nikki.
Yeah, I just stepped in.
Oh,
so.
okay.
Hi,
Could you
everybody.
introduce yourself, Nikki?
I'm Nikki. Nice to see everybody. Nikki Lincoln.
Can you all hear the folks pretty well around the table? Zoomers.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I'd ask the Zoomers if you could mute, and if, like I say, if you have a question or a comment, just unmute and say, "Hey, John," because if you use the raise hand feature, I may be able to hear it, but if you just raise your hand, obviously I won't be able to tell. So if you just give me a second, I'm going to share my screen.
Videos. More options for participants. Select the window or an application that you want to share. Basic tab. Select list box. Share sound checkbox not checked. JAWS home news. JAWS introduction to Reconstruction. Info started screen share. Center subtitle. Text box. Center title. Subtitle. Please.
Can you all hear? Can you all see?
Participants cannot-
Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
How about Zoomers?
Yeah, they're shaking their
Yep.
All right. Yes, good. All right. Technology, when it works, it's great, right?
Subtitle placeholder level 1. By John Riehl, Oseh Shalom.
Okay, I apologize that you're going to have to hear my speech. I wasn't able to get it to come through a headset or headphones, so my apologies to the Zoomers and to the folks on the table. So this is just basically your introductory slide.
Screen sharing the introduction to Reconstructionist Judaism presentation. Subtitle placeholder level 1. By John Riehl, Oseh Shalom. The line right. May, June 2020. Subtitle placeholder level 1. By John Riehl, Oseh Shalom.
Did it move to slide 2 yet?
No.
Edit. Center title. Text box.
It's.
If you want it in presentation mode, that might, or would that do away with the audio description?
No, I don't know. Can you put it in presentation mode?
Yeah, would you like me to?
I would love it, Tim.
Okay.
We have a tech. I thought I had it in that, but obviously it got out of it. So,
I don't know if it matters to you, John. But
well, it may or may not. We'll find out.
all right, let me see if I can Okay, so this is where I'm going to screw something up, right?
Maybe.
Can you take one of those chairs back there and put it next to Marcia? Because we have one person that I know is going to be coming in.
So there,
We
you mean
we have
there
a
is
chair.
a chair?
There's
Oh,
a chair.
no.
I've
How
got
about between?
bifocals and
Like there's no kind of a place.
sometimes.
So three of you on that side. Because a person's going to
Okay.
be coming in.
All right.
and
Let me
she's
do
new.
So we have
something
two people
more
coming,
radical.
So somebody's
Yeah.
in that seat.
Helen
I'm
is
on the
the
presentation.
and, yeah.
I thought that was.
You're in the slide sorting.
I thought that was going to be you, woman,
No,
Debbie.
yeah, Deborah,
Exit out of
I
it.
think as a child doing religious and stuff, and is going to come in once he's settled.
I met her when Rabbi Rebecca was taking
I
him on
please
the
cash
tour.
feed outlook files checked.
I was very enthusiastic.
That should probably do it.
Introduction to
Yeah.
Reconstructionism presentation
I
slides
think we're
May,
good.
June
Thank you.
2023 Word. Check. Introduction to opening PowerPoint.
These chairs are wrong for this.
Menu slide 1 Introduction to Reconstructionist
Okay.
Judaism. Everything you always wanted to know about Reconstructionism, but were afraid to ask. Title text box 3. Text box 3.
Yeah,
Leaving menus. Documents. JAWS Home News. Zoom meeting. Zoom. Introduction to Reconstructionist
It should be in the
Judaism.
slideshow mode.
You see it up there in the top,
Blank.
near the left.
One slideshow with your digital plan.
I always just push a key.
Ah,
Where are you?
Same.
Looking.
Slide-
after
You click on
animation,
slideshow, right?
keep going right.
Yeah, keep
The
going.
way your
Insert,
finger
draw,
is.
design, transitions, animation,
Okay, hang on.
slideshow.
Oh. New group.
Yeah.
Blank present. Added. Basis. Berlin. Circuit.
Not these.
We're making,
Yeah.
we're making life harder for John, I think.
Menu. Office
Yeah,
phone.
he's-
Dismiss button. Go to. Leaving menus. Documents. JAWS Home News. Zoom meeting.
Okay, let me get
Zoom. Introduction to Reconstruct. Documents.
out
Document.
of
Menu.
that.
Office home notifications group. Go to OneDrive button.
Let me get out of
Leaving
that.
menus.
Introduction.
Introduction to Reconstructionist Judaism presentation slides May
There's
20.
like 6
Go
people
button.
on
Dismiss
Zoom.
button.
All right, you do it.
Go to OneDrive button.
I don't want to go to OneDrive. Thank you.
Level 1.
Yes, go ahead.
All right.
I had this all working, of course, before class.
So you needed to say got it over there. Get rid of that box. There you go. And
And then go up to
go up to the
slideshow.
top and it should say slideshow right up there.
Yeah, it does.
And you click that. And then now from beginning
Beginning.
or
From
and if you
beginning.
can't see
Current
it.
slides.
Yeah, there you go.
Introduction to Reconstructionist
Okay.
Judaism presentation slides
Now
May
I need to
20.
share the
PowerPoint
screen.
Present review. Present review
There
slide.
we
Pause
go.
timer. Restart
Now
timer.
it's
Pen and laser pointer. See all slides. Zoom.
No, it
Image.
should be shared.
Can you guys see it on Zoom?
You're gonna have to unmute.
Not yet.
No.
Slide 1. Introduction to Reconstruct. JAWS Home News. Zoom meeting. Zoom meeting. Share with us. View button. Select the window or an application that you want to share. Basic tab selected.
I know.
List box. JAWS Home News. PowerPoint. Introduction.
There's an
PowerPoint
OK
slideshow.
button
Introduction to
there that's
Reconstruct.
waiting
Slide
to
1.
be
Introduction to Reconstructionist
clicked.
Judaism. Everything you always wanted to know about
Okay.
Reconstructionism.
Now you should be able to see it.
We can see it. Slides are cut a little bit, but we can see it.
It needs to be
zoomed out somehow.
It's, there's an aspect ratio problem.
Screen sharing meeting controls. Screen sharing meeting controls.
Andy, does the slide fit the size of John's screen?
No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
It did.
Yeah, that's odd.
You might have to hit escape to bring it back to normal size.
I am.
PowerPoint slideshow. Introduction to Reconstruction.
What about now?
Yeah, got
Yay.
it. Now consumers see it.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you.
Everybody's
You've just
Now
seen.
we
Go to
can
the
say
next slide. That's the whole point is
You-
now
You're
you
just
go
going
to
to
the
hit the
next
next arrow or the
Screen
down
connector 31
arrow,
J.
right?
Right.
Screen connector
So,
20 J.
No.
to the right.
Slide 2.
There you go.
Okay, all right. This is a great example of Reconstructionism in action. That is the collective community operates together to make stuff work, as opposed to the individual maven on stuff. So,
Along with a whole lot of guilt that we made things harder for people.
right? No. This is really. I want you to keep this example in mind as we go through this course. This is a really great example of not only Oseh Shalom, of the incredible spirit and communal attitude of people here, but this is really an embodiment of what Reconstructionist Judaism says, of the community is more important ultimately, that we are all individuals, but as individuals we are part of a collective community. And that community is what is the key difference between Reconstructionism and the other movements. It's much more, to use the Reconstructionist jargon term, communitarian, which I promise not to use any more in this course, because but that's a standard Reconstructionist jargon term that you may hear some of the real mavens talk about. We are a communitarian movement. But you saw an example of that.
Slide 3, Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jew. Slide.
So, Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish.
Share has been stopped.
Oh man.
What happened?
Yeah, I think you may have hit the wrong button.
Yeah. All right.
It's possible.
Upper ribbon expanded. Slideshow tab 8 of 12. Leaving menus. Zoom meeting. Leaving ribbons. Select the
That
window
could
and
also be your
advanced tab.
slideshare
Basic tab selected. Advanced
controller,
tab.
if that would help.
Basic tab selected.
How would you? No, we can't, because I can't move the computer.
Oh, okay. Well, I was saying I could sit next to you and just.
You'd have to sit on my lap, and which might be good, but it,
It's not that communitarian.
Basic tab selected.
What's
Advanced
your
tab.
definition? Discuss them all.
Introduction to Reconstructionist Judaism presentation slides May 2023. You have started screen share. Press F6 to switch
Okay,
between Zoom windows. Screen share
There's
meeting
a
control.
There's a pop-up with an
pop-up with an
okay.
OK in the
Screen share
middle of
meeting
the
control.
screen.
Participants can now see your application. Mute the current audio
That's
setting.
great.
Stop video alt V. Introduction to Reconstruction. JAWS home use. Zoom. Screen sharing meeting control.
Do you,
Stop video.
there's an
Video settings.
OK
Button drop down.
button.
I can't see the okay.
Yeah, it
we
says,
can't.
do you
More
want
options.
somebody
I don't know how
to...
it shows
More
up.
options.
I got
Full
you.
Andy's
button.
coming.
How about now?
No, it's still there. Andy's there.
Thank you, Andy.
You bet.
There you go.
All right.
Do you want to get back in?
Now you got to go into the
No, I need to go
slideshow.
back. I know.
Introduction to Reconstructionist Judaism presentation slides May
Are we
2023.
there?
Well, you
No,
know.
Can they see it? Because as long as they can see it, it's okay that we
JAWS
see
home
the
use. Zoom.
sidebar.
Introduction to Reconstructionist Judaism presentation slide.
I'm in the
We
presentation.
can see
Okay.
it.
All right. Let's
Okay,
keep.
that's fine.
All right. Let's
Yeah.
keep moving.
As long as we keep hitting the down. You
All
just
right.
have to keep hitting the down button,
I know.
okay?
I know.
All right.
Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. We'll talk about that, what that means in a second. But if there are lots of phrases and jargon terms that you're going to hear, hopefully not that many, but that all movements have jargon terms to define themselves. This is a key concept that we're going to delve into in just a couple of minutes. And what does that mean, evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people?
Timeline of Reconstructionist Judaism slide 4 of 29.
Okay, this is kind of a semi-humorous slide. I have 18, this is a timeline 1880 BCE to 1881 CE, pre-Reconstructionist Jewish history. You know, not much happened. We had the Exodus from Egypt, we had the two Israel kingdoms, we had the exile to Babylon, we had the destruction of the temple, we had exile, we had the Enlightenment, we had movement to America, and then in 1881, Mordecai Kaplan was born in Lithuania. Well, sure, that's because everything is prehistory, right?
Right.
Now, we may get into this, but the rabbis are fond of pointing out, and others in movement, that Reconstructionism, although it hasn't been called that, has been around for a long time in Judaism. And although I kind of did a humorous thing with the prehistory, if you think about Jewish history, there's been a hell of a lot of Reconstructionism going on in Jewish history. I mean, you had the exile of the Jews to, well, first of all, you had the Exodus, and you had Jews moving from slavery into a free people, living in a free land and having to adopt and create customs and laws and, you know, religious precepts to govern themselves as a free people. Then you had us moving to Babylon, and we had to deal with being Jews in exile, where we couldn't make sacrifices at the temple. So then we came back, and then the Romans kicked us out pretty permanently from, or most of us anyway, from Palestine, and we had to figure out, okay, we don't have the temple Judaism anymore, but we do have rabbis. So we created the institution of rabbis. Then we moved to the Enlightenment, and, you know, from being ghettoized, marginalized, to use the current term, people into figuring out how to integrate into more mainstream European life. Well, that worked out, and it didn't work out. then you had Jews moving to America, and as we're going to learn about Mordecai Kaplan, him trying to figure out what it does mean to be a Jew in America. So, if you think about it, we've been from a Reconstructionist perspective, even though Orthodox Judaism and Conservative Judaism and to some degree Reform would admit this, we've been reconstructing ourselves for a long time. And that's inevitable, because one of the key concepts of Reconstruction is that each generation of Jews reconstructs its Judaism to meet the times that we're in, to meet the generational needs, to meet the generational zeitgeist, as it were, of where we are in our history. And if we hadn't done that, we would have died as a people thousands of years ago. So I'll put this timeline up, let you look at it. We may come back to it.
Timeline of Reconstructionist Judaism, content slide 5 of 29.
There's a lot on this timeline, and there'll be a quiz, of course, a final exam. The class, you'll be responsible for most of these dates, but I'll make it multiple choice so it'll be easier. It's interesting that Mordecai Kaplan didn't want to create a Reconstructionist movement at all. He was talked into it by Ira Eisenstein. Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, as you can see from the timeline, taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the premier institution of conservative Judaism. It still is. He began teaching in 1909, and he resigned from JTS in 1980 when Reconstructionist Judaism founded its own seminary. Let's see, where are we on that?
Timeline of Reconstructionist Judaism, content slide 6 of 29.
Okay, so again, there's more stuff that happens. Kol HaNeshama, the prayer book that we all know and love, was published in 1994. It's a long time ago now. There's talk about creating a new Reconstructionist prayer book. I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime. It may happen in yours. But it was a long and involved process that Oseh Shalom was intimately involved with. We produced 50 pages of commentary on a draft version of the prayer book that Rabbi Hirsch, I think, was suffering from PTSD because he kept mentioning it whenever he came to Oseh Shalom. So
that was 1994 that it was published?
Yes. Yep. In 2002, I want to highlight a couple of these things. In 2002, we began the process of establishing a summer camp. And that has been rightly called the crown jewel of Reconstructionist Judaism, maybe along with the seminary, the rabbinical seminary. It's a wonderful camp for those of you who have not been there, in which Reconstructionist values are really brought to life. It's camp known as Camp Havaya, which to some of us reminds us of Arthur Godfrey for his Havaya, 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 but that's that he used to say on his radio show. But it is a wonderful camp. In 2012, am I on the right slide on the timeline? Yeah. 2012, JRF, the Jewish Reconstructionist Federation, merged with the RRC, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Come in.
Hi.
Yeah?
I'm sorry to interrupt. John, I have Val Kaplan on the line, and she's very frustrated. She says she cannot get in on Zoom, and she's dying to see the class.
I can't help her.
Anything you can do? No, huh?
No, we'll pray for her. But
or she knows it already.
Tell her I can't help her.
All right, I'll tell her.
Okay. As we'll talk about, and you can see from the timeline, there were three arms of the movement. There's the lay arm, which is what Oseh Shalom is part of, which used to be called the Jewish Reconstructionist Federation. Now, and in 2012, after a lot of Sturm und Drang, we merged with the college, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, which is the second, quote, arm of the movement, and we became one unified whole. The name of the movement in 2018 was changed after a lot of really ridiculous process was changed in 2018 to Reconstructing Judaism. That's the name of the organization that we're part of. The movement's still Reconstructionist Judaism, but Reconstructing Judaism is the college and the congregations. There are about 100 congregations, and the Reconstructionist Rabbinical Assembly is the rabbinic professional part of the movement. So, in 20, as we'll learn in this course, Reconstructing Judaism, as we like to say, quote, punches well above its weight, meaning it's the smallest of the movements, and it has done an incredible amount to advance Judaism in North America and really Judaism in parts of Europe as well, through its commitment to inclusivity. You can see some of the highlights that I showed on the timeline, and we can go back to it. We were the first. We published interfaith wedding ceremonies. We graduated the first openly gay couple or openly gay rabbis. In 2015, we published or instituted a really pretty revolutionary policy that allows rabbinical students to be ordained if they have non-Jewish partners or spouses. That was a real revolution for us, and as is the case with the classic example of the bar mitzvah, those of you who I'm sure have heard that one of the things we're most famous for is we held the first modern bat mitzvah in 1922. Judith Kaplan Eisenstein, Rabbi Eisenstein's daughter, had the first bat mitzvah, and other movements eventually picked that up. Well, the same with this non-Jewish partner policy. Other movements, the Reform movement in particular, said, hey, that's a great idea, we'll do it too. So Reconstructionism has invariably been on the vanguard of these issues, and other movements, we've kind of, been the bellwether. Other movements have said, yeah, that went okay. Judaism didn't wither away as a religion. We'll do it too.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Can I ask just about the geography? I know that RRC is based just outside of Philadelphia.
Yes, that's right.
And Mordecai Kaplan, I think, was where, in New York or something?
He was based in New York.
Other kind of centers or geographic places where these institutions popped up?
Well, there are congregations throughout America, throughout the U.S., and there are a couple in Canada, and there's some in Europe. The institutions have pretty much been East Coast based. We had a camp on the West Coast that we started in 2018, but it didn't work out very well. And it ended up closing after the pandemic. It just didn't reopen. So it's pretty much, the institutions are East Coast based, although we're spread out as a movement all over the country. Did that answer your question, Tim?
Yeah, and I guess, is JRF, I lost
JRF is dead.
It's no, okay.
There's no such thing as JRF. It's now,
JRF.
it's now called, yeah, that's right. It's now called Reconstructing Judaism.
Okay.
Because we merged the college and the lay arm of the movement together.
Okay.
So JRF, rest in peace. It's now no more as an organization.
And if we drive past what used to be the RRC, it has a new sign up in front or something?
I don't think no, I don't think quite yet. The movement, the college is in Wyncote, Pennsylvania. It's we have a building. It's a really crappy building.
Well, we've got a hospital.
But it's ours. We've ordained over 400 rabbis to this point, and it's really an amazing experience if you get a chance to go up and see classes. You can make arrangements to go up and attend classes of visitors. So it is really an amazing place to be with the spirit and the students, and we have really incredible faculty that some of you have seen in some of our scholar weekends. So I'm going to stop screen share at this point. God willing.
Screen sharing meeting. JAWS home Zoom introduction. Screen share. JAWS home Zoom. Introduction to screen sharing meeting controls. Pause button. Your screen share has been stopped. Zoom meeting. Content left panel.
All right. So we're gonna now focus on some of the readings that we are that will really help us figure out what Reconstructionism is all about. Anybody at this point have any other questions or comments that you want to make? So, slide 7, had I shown it, says Judaism, the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. There are 3 components to it: belonging, behaving, and believing. Belonging, according to Reconstructionism, you're part of the Jewish people. You know, whether you're Jewish from a Jew from birth, a Jew by choice, whether you're married or in relationship with somebody who's Jewish and you're not Jewish, you're part of the Jewish people. So you belong. That also distinguishes us from some of the other movements. Is for some of the movements, believing is really key. But it goes back to the biblical the biblical statement, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. You know, for us, Reconstruction, you know, we're part of the Jewish people, and everything else flows from that. Behaving comes second. Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we'll say. So, you know, there are certain things we do as Reconstructionists, and the last is the nishma. We'll speak, we'll say, but we'll believe. Believing comes last because Reconstructionism allows for such a wide range of belief, as we'll see as we go through this course. So let's take a look at reading 1, because we're going to get into now what does the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people mean? What does that mean? What does evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people mean?
So it's not the first 3 pages,
That's right.
right after that.
I don't know what's in the first 3 pages. Is that values-based decision making?
No, it's the other one. It's the from God to good
Oh.
godliness.
Oh no,
proposal
we'll
for
get to predicate theology.
Yeah.
So we're where?
We're at
Reading number 1.
reading
It says
one. The
reading
third
1.
page.
Transnaturalism of God is the power
going.
for salvation.
No, for
Well, that's
us.
what it says on the top, and then
Here,
it says
Okay.
reading one.
For us, Judaism has been created by Jews over the course of our history. So, can you found that?
No.
Reading says to become fully human.
I see it.
Reading
It's
9.
reading 9 on page 6.
What?
Like a helper.
Reading 1 starts to become fully human. Man has to achieve on
Yeah.
a subconscious level a process that operates on a
Okay,
non-conscious
well,
level.
Yeah, but
Somebody
he's on
read.
reading 9 though.
I can read the
Reading
one that
9.
you want. You
But
want us
if
to be
you're on
reading?
reading 9,
For us, Judaism has been created by Jews over the course of our... So let's just take a moment to read that. I don't know if we need to read all of it out loud, but... You all have that on Zoom, or we're on reading... On my stuff, it's reading number 1. On their sheets, it's reading 9. I don't know how that happened.
9, yes,
Yeah,
9 on what you sent out.
What?
9 on what you sent out.
Really?
yes.
Well, do you?
Okay. All right. That was my fault then.
Are there Roman numerals in Braille? 'Cause
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
IX, so.
I know what I...
That Kaplan
Yeah.
has joined the meeting.
No, I can
No, it says
imagine.
reading number 1 on my
Yeah,
thing here.
okay.
Reading number 1. So it's not a Roman numeral mistake.
Okay. All right.
Either way, as long as you know the first sentences, we're good.
Welcome, Val. I'm sorry I couldn't help you. Val Kaplan has just joined our meeting.
Hi, Beth.
So this talks about what does it mean to what does evolution mean? And one interesting thing about evolution, as you see from the reading, is that evolution says, you know, a lot of us sometimes interpret evolution as things going from really primitive and really bad to, you know, a better and better. You know, you go up the ladder rungs as far as, you know, our primitive ancestors didn't understand crap, and you know they didn't know what was going on. But we are sophisticated members of Judaism in the 21st century. We really know what's going on, and that isn't what Reconstructionism says. Similarly, we advocate an evolution of Jewish civilization which continually adapts to the ever-changing conditions with which Jews are confronted. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. Our position does not require... Can I get somebody to read that paragraph? Our position does not require...
Our position does not require a belief that, in all or even most respects, contemporary Jews know more or are more ethical than previous generations of Jews. To be sure, on some issues, for example, the equality of women and men or the abolition of slavery, we believe that our ethical values transcend those of our ancestors. Our historical perspective, however, cautions us against making such claims too often and too confidently, for we are as much the products of our times as our ancestors were the products of theirs.
Okay, and if you could, in the next paragraph, you could skip to, thus Reconstructionists are involved. It's in the middle of the next paragraph.
Thus, Reconstructionists are involved in a sensitive balancing act in which we seek to reinterpret the past in a contemporary form without discarding the treasury of wisdom embedded in Jewish civilization.
That's pretty much it. That's what being in the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. That's what evolution means, and that's what Reconstructionism really is. The other quote that everybody's heard way too often is tradition gets a vote, not a veto. Well, that paragraph, those sentences define what that means. That as Reconstructionists, we take the tradition very seriously. That our ancestors did stuff, and sometimes for thousands of years. They must have had reasons to do it. Can we learn from that? Can we adapt? Can we adopt those traditions? After study and consideration, we may say, no, we can't anymore. But Reconstructionism, one of the hallmarks, as we'll get to when we talk about some of the comparisons between the movements, is Reconstructionism says you gotta wrestle with your tradition. You can't just say, like the Reform did, kashrut is a primitive relic of the past and we're rejecting it. No, as Reconstructionists, we look at kashrut, for example, of keeping kosher, and we say, okay, what does it mean? What values could it have for our generation? How can we use kashrut to help us relate to food and how it's produced and fair wages for its production, for example? So Reconstruction demands a very serious grappling with tradition. That's what evolving means. That's what religious civilization means. Let's look at reading number 2.
And how does it start?
Like peoplehood, civilization implies a totality. Good
Number
Lord.
7.
How the hell did that happen? So this is what Jews live. We live in two civilizations, and we always have. We live in the civilization that we are part of. We live in America. We live in Ireland. We live in Russia. We're part of that society, and we're also Jews. One belongs to a group and participates in the life of that group as one primary way of being in the world. And somebody could read the next paragraph. Because of the nature of contemporary society.
Because of the nature of contemporary society, our lives are fragmented into many pieces. Family, work, and leisure activities fall into separate compartments. In the process, we lose the sense that our lives are unified wholes. A civilizational definition of Judaism can be of assistance in regaining our self-integration.
Somebody read the next paragraph.
Viewing Judaism as a civilization also enables us to appreciate those elements of Judaism often taken for granted or forgotten. The Jewish arts, music, literature, dance, drama, sculpture, storytelling, and photography take on new importance when looking at the totality of Jewish civilization. Kaplan urged that we emphasize these underdeveloped elements. They are the natural expression of a living civilization.
So, thanks everybody for reading. Can you all hear okay on Zoom?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the Zoomers?
Yeah, I can't figure out which sheet you're reading from here of the three originally posted, but I'll catch it.
Somehow
This was reading to, it's on page 4, bottom of page 4.
Bottom of page 4. Somehow, when the packets got printed, they changed. Somehow, stuff got changed. So
They reconstructed.
yeah, they
thank
reconstructed
you.
it. Yes, yes, very good.
All right, so it's real. I see it. I think it's real.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next the reading that we're going to go to now, I hesitate to say the next reading, will kind of sum up what what this means, what the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people means.
Give us a first
I will. To say that we are an evolving religious civilization means that we always look to make meaning and to revalue.
This is
Page
reading
7.
11, page 7.
Page
It's
7.
like a race.
Bottom, second reading on page 7.
Second reading, page 7.
Thank you.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yeah.
Since I was just inspired by the part about the Jewish arts,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to mention that the Columbia Concert Band this Sunday at Riverhill High School at 3 p.m. is playing a free concert. And the reason I'm saying it is because we're playing, one of the things we're playing, the best thing we're playing, is a bunch of fiddler.
Great.
And we have these two clarinetists playing this gorgeous klezmer part, and it made my soul thrill, and I was like, clearly this is my music, because it just tingles up and down my body.
Are you the band director?
Sorry?
Are you the band director?
No, I'm a percussionist.
Wonderful.
Say what is it again?
What time?
Riverhill High School, 3 p.m. on Sunday.
A week from today.
Yes, correct. Sorry, next Sunday. Columbia Concert Band. Thank you for that moment.
Yeah, thank you for the advertisement. Was brought to you by Oseh Shalom on behalf of. No, that. You know, we live and breathe this as Reconstructionist Jews, as Jews, how integral music and art and film are to and food are to our lives as Jews. But this was a revolutionary concept when Kaplan formulated it in the 1920s and 30s and onward. Before then, Judaism was looked on as a religion. Mm-hmm. It wasn't looked on, and the revolutionary nature with a capital R that Kaplan brought to this whole discussion is, wait a minute, no, Judaism is not just a religion, like Reform and Conservative and even Orthodox looked at it. And no, it's a civilization. It's all these things put together with the religious aspects integral to that civilization. The religious civilization of the Jewish people, not the civilization, but the religious civilization. That's Kaplan's, one of his true gifts to the world, to the Jewish world, is creating that revolutionary concept. And now we take it for granted, but back then it was truly revolutionary. And that, basically was only 100 years ago in Jewish history that he developed this.
It's part of what makes our religious school here at Oseh so magical, because it covers all those different cultural arts. And it's stunning to me, having grown up in a conservative Hebrew school that was very boring, to see what my kids get to do here.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
You should see them right now shooting.
I know. I'm like the history of Jewish archers.
Duck.
Well, hopefully they're not using actual steel-tipped arrows.
They are.
Are they really?
I mean,
but
those
targets.
I
know my 9-year-old.
They look pretty lethal to me.
Yeah, we'll be deleting that from the Zoom recording for our insurance purposes.
for legal liability.
Right. So
they did limit it to older kids.
So let's look at.
Hesitate to say.
I am really sorry about the readings.
Okay.
Let's look at reading the reading that says to say that we are an evolving religious civilization.
Bottom of 7.
Bottom.
Okay, anybody want to read that?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, Bill.
To say that we are an evolving religious civilization
A
means
little louder, Bill.
to say that we are an evolving religious civilization means that we always look to make meaning and to revalue, to reinterpret, to find meaning. It's not that we have always been progressive in the way that we've been progressive today. It's okay to acknowledge that and to say, and we are reconstructing that. It frees me not to have to apologize for every silly thing that a Jew has done over the course of thousands of years, and it frees us to move forward without feeling bad about betraying the legacies of our ancestors, because Judaism hasn't been perfect, and it's not God-given. It's a human-created and an encounter with the divine, but it is, as I mentioned this morning, however divine it is, it's filtered through very human, imperfect beings. We are part of the Jewish people, and we have that heritage, but it's okay. You can love your grandparents and great-grandparents, even if you don't like everything they did. You are still their grandchildren, but it doesn't mean that you have to do everything their way.
And that's what tradition gets a vote, not a veto. That's what that means. And, to get maybe a little bit political, I think we could apply this in America, this concept of, look, we did things as a country that we need to be ashamed of and acknowledge and grapple with. Mm-hmm. But, we have our ideals, we have our own aspirations as a country, and we need to integrate our past and not condone it and even to condemn parts of it, but to look at ourselves in a broader context. And that's what this article basically says that we do as Jews. I mean, we owned slaves for thousands, maybe 1,000 years as Jews. We went in and conquered and wiped out whole civilizations or whole peoples to take the land of Israel originally. Stuff we've done, doing now. You can't condone how we're treating the Palestinians, but that doesn't mean that you love Judaism even less and that you're any less part of Judaism because we have done or doing things that we can't condone. So I'll get off of my soapbox now. So we're gonna the value of the readings being totally out of order is I can skip stuff and you won't know it. So there are other readings in this packet that talk about Kaplan. Some of Kaplan's ideas, how he formulated them. You can read it on your own. We won't go into it. We won't go into it right now because we only have it's 11:15. We have about halfway to go in our first session. So, but Kaplan really revolutionized how we look at Judaism, and he took his ideas from his contemporaries, from the society that he lived in.
And was that New York, or was that?
Well, it was. He lived in New York. But there was a whole intellectual current that was swirling around the milieu in which he lived. Now there were philosophers. Bill knows a lot about this because that's what he did his master's thesis in, right, Bill?
Yeah. So John Dewey was at Columbia, just across the street. John Dewey. Great philosopher of education, pragmatism, and actually used the term reconstructing education. And he was a big influence. And Paul Tillich was at Union Theological Seminary across. Talking geography. Yeah, right. There's a triangle between Columbia, JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary, and Union, and they were all really tied up with each other, and they were basically having coffee and hashing out these ideas a lot of the time. So it's very vibrant. I mean, it was like the equivalent of being in Seattle in the early '90s for grunge rock music or something. It's like,
can you imagine some of those discussions? So one of our readings says this: Kaplan's thinking assumed that the values embodied in American society, values like liberty and democracy, are the culmination of the progress of human civilization. In Kaplan's day, the predominant worldview exalted the impersonal approach of the scientist and assumed that rational beings would use their minds together to create a better world. Let's see how that's worked out. And in some respects, it has. But we would say, living in 21st century America, no, Kaplan, the intellect has to be the emotion has to be factored in with the intellect. Reconstructionism, as formulated by Kaplan, was very head-centric, intellectual. Spirituality to Kaplan, and I know at least one person on Zoom kind of has this approach as well. Spirituality is getting into a really good discussion of a Torah portion or an ethical concept, and the give and take that goes with that discussion. I remember Ira Eisenstein, who was one of the seminal founders of the Reconstructionist movement, speaking at Oseh Shalom. And Val, you'll remember this as well. And he got up on the bima.
I'm laughing.
I can hear you. And he railed again. He pounded his fist on the bima and railed against angel services. I can't believe, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the quote. I can't believe that as Reconstructionists we conduct services and we invoke angels for healing. What is this? To him and to his contemporaries and to Kaplan, that kind of emotional, heart-centric Judaism that Rabbi Daria and to a lesser extent Rabbi Josh embody is totally anathema, would be totally anathema to Reconstructionism. And some of the older Reconstructionists who joined synagogues and founded Chavurot as embodiments of Kaplan's thinking are horrified. We're horrified, and some of them still are, by what they see Reconstructionism has evolved into. Much more emotional, much more heart-centric, much more, quote, woo-woo, as some people have described it. Really gotten away from the head-centric, intellectual, scientific approach to study and to Judaism that Kaplan advocated and revolutionized. And, you know, if Mordechai Kaplan, Zichrono Livracha, were alive today, he would say, I don't like it, but that's what the movement has evolved into, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. Because that's part of the nature of the evolution of the Jewish people, is evolving in the movement has to change to meet the needs of the generations that it is serving. Otherwise, it's a dead historical relic. And that's, you know, for those of us who've been around a long time, who've really seen some of that evolution in Reconstructionism from, and we'll talk about this in a little while when we talk about God concepts, the evolution in what God is, from, God is the power that makes for salvation in the universe, to, a much more mystical approach to the divine, as you'll hear from Rabbi Josh and Daria, and which a lot of people at Oseh Shalom really subscribe to. And Reconstructionism would say that's okay. That's okay, because that's who we are as Jews, and that's who we are as a movement.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think it was influenced at all by renewal?
What was influenced at all?
Reconstructionism, like to get more touchy-feely and more mystical.
Yeah, but most renewal rabbis came out of Reconstructionist seminary, so there's a lot of, I don't want to use the term incestuous, but that means
cross-pollination.
Cross-pollination, yeah, that's a better. There's been a lot of cross-pollination between renewal and Reconstructionism. And Rabbi Kendra Kalin is taking her cantorial courses from renewal, for example. Rabbi Daria and Rabbi Josh are very heavily influenced by the renewal movement. And renewal is basically a reaction to Reconstructionism. Renewal, and we'll get into this more when we talk about the different movements, but renewal said, wait a minute, you guys, Reconstruction is way too head-centric. There's this whole other aspect. There's the heart. There's the emotion that you guys aren't dealing with effectively. And, we're creating this other movement, and it's basically one person created it, who was a former Reconstructionist, said, wait a minute, we have to deal with the heart here, and you guys aren't doing this in Reconstructionism. Reconstructionism has responded, I think, mostly unconsciously by saying, you're right. And it's also responded to its constituents, to the people in the movement, because that's what people want, is that more emotional-centric Judaism, and Reconstructionism responded independent of whether Renewal would have done it or not, I think.
Could I just make...
John, I have a comment.
Hang on. Bill, let me look at it. Who is that on Zoom?
Hey, John, it's Jessica.
Go ahead, Jessica.
I just had a comment that came to mind. I wanted to add to that as we're talking about the intellectual aspect and the perceived reaction of moving beyond the intellect into the emotional. I thought that really doesn't serve the aim of civilization, because to encompass all the wonderful things that make a civilization, it has to move beyond the intellect.
Yes, that's right. Kaplan was arguing intellect for more the religious aspect of the civilization. I think he would argue that dance and music tap into emotions, but the intellectual part of it had to do with how we do the religion part of the civilization. But you're right, you can't just have intellect if you're going to call yourself a civilization. So that would have been an interesting critique to give to Kaplan if he were alive, and Eisenstein. Yep.
Hey, John.
Yeah, Bill, hang on. Bill wanted to make it.
Yeah, just that, and on it's sort of in normative Judaism, the Orthodox side, the flowering and the development of the Hasidic movement was actually a similar reaction in many respects.
Yes, that's right.
And it was dance and sing and emotion and the heart, and that really drove that movement in its inception, at least.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That makes sense.
But it's interesting what sometimes you forget about. Hasidism is that Hasids insisted that you be really well grounded in traditional Judaism. That it wasn't just like some folks do now. You focus on the dancing and the singing. Hasidim were really grounded in Talmud and Torah and the traditional ways of observing. They just did it, integrating music and dance and singing into that observance.
They brought the fun.
Yeah, that's right.
They brought the heart, if we're going to use the heart versus head.
Well, yeah.
They use both.
That's right.
They thought both were important.
Right. And that created a huge schism, as some of you may know, between the Hasidim and the Mitnagdim in 18th and 19th century Europe, and even 20th century, between the traditional Orthodox Jewish rabbis and the Hasidim. There was bitter animosity between some of those sects and some of those rabbis, some of the different groups of Jews in Eastern Europe. I mean, bordering on, we won't speak to you because you're part of this movement, and we can't talk to you because you're part of this sect, and you're part of this rabbi's group, and the Hasidim are a bunch of yokels who don't know anything about Judaism, and we're the true Jew. There was all this stuff swirling around. So, lest you think that we're kind of some sort of pure historical people. No, we have had our hatreds and religious civil wars and stuff in the past. So some of that was part of the pre-Kaplanian history that I kind of glossed over a little bit in the timeline.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Earlier, you referred to the 3 B's of Reconstructionism.
Belonging, behavior, and belief. Yes.
With a sort of tension around the role intellect versus emotion/belief, I think. Where does belief kind of fit in right now in this discussion about I guess this is getting at concepts of God, but and whether angels should be mentioned in services. But it sounds like Kaplan was very much of an intellectual, which in my mind is a little bit at odds with notions of belief.
Yeah. Well, Kaplan, well, in a way, but Kaplan throughout his entire life tried to reconcile in intellectual terms essentially a belief in some sort of God thing. And I'm not an expert in Kaplanian literature. I find Mordecai Kaplan very difficult to read, as we'll see in a few minutes. But he struggled to try to express in rational terms essentially what we would admit is basically non-rational. He wasn't willing to admit that basically, look, it's non-rational. It's for him, as I read in that reading excerpt, rationality was key. That you had to, if something didn't make rational sense, and you couldn't make it make rational sense, then it should be discarded. There's a classic example that is in our prayer book, actually, in our Machzor, during I think it was the 1920s or 30s, he tried to get rid of the traditional Kol Nidre for Yom Kippur, because he said this is ridiculous. We're not making vows to, what's this thing about making vows to to God? No, that's not intellectually honest. I can't reconstruct this. So he used the same melody, but he put a psalm in, I forget which psalm it was, that reflected his intellectual grappling with that concept. His congregation went nuts. His congregation said, no, Rabbi Kaplan, you can't do that. We're talking about Kol Nidre. You can't change that tradition. We don't care if it's not intellectually honest for you. We're talking about a whole emotional thing for us here.
The core of the whole service.
Sure, but for Kaplan, he couldn't say it if it wasn't intellectually honest.
Right.
And I think that's a weakness on his own, his part, because sometimes you have to give up the rationality and look at things metaphorically or look at things in a different way. It's the same discussion that Dan Glazer, God love him, started with the making prayer real. Those of you who remember that discussion grew out of Dan's and some others' discontent with, I can't pray this stuff because it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't believe it. So then they took a reconstructional approach and said, okay, let's grapple with this. Let's figure it out and see what we can do, to make some of it make sense. And if we can make it make sense, great. If some of it we can't, then we can't. But let's not just discard it because it doesn't make sense to us. Any questions? Other comments? Anybody on Zoom? So go ahead.
I was waiting to make sure.
No, go ahead.
Zoom was quiet. It makes me really proud because I can't tell you how many times I've had discussions with Christians, right? And for them, faith is so crucial. And when they, a lot of my friends who are Christians were not. I have friends who are diehard Christians, but I have a lot of friends who were raised Christian and are not into it anymore, and who said that when they went to Sunday school, it was the opposite of asking questions, and I try to explain to them what we do here, and it feels totally like foreign to them, and it's they don't, because there's so many people on the left who are anti-religion, right? And when I talk to them about, well, I'm a Reconstructionist Jew, we're the coolest there is. Like,
good for you.
They don't necessarily know that. And when I explain, like, no, seriously, this is what we do. Like, I years ago, when I first became aware of Reconstructionism, I met a Reconstructionist rabbinical college student who was amazing, and I told her, I wonder if I would want to be a rabbi, but I'm not sure I believe in God. And she said, I don't think that's required. And I was like, are you kidding me? Who are these Jews?
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting, and it's very anathema to what most Christians do.
It is, because for Christians, faith, it starts with faith.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am the way, the truth, and the light. Those who believeth in me shall be saved, right? That's Christian doctrine. That, according to the New Testament, that's what Jesus said. Belief, you start with belief, and integrated with that is behavior. And, you know, there are certain ways that you should behave as if you're a Christian. Charity and humility and stuff that we may or may not be seeing from some who profess to be. but those are core Christian beliefs, that charity, humility, mercy, you know, the same things that we believe in. But for them, for Christians, it starts with faith, that you believe in Jesus and all that represents, and then you move out to, because of that, you're now part of Christianity, and then you act in certain ways. So it's you're right, it's the reverse. For us, it's, you're part of the Jewish people. Deal with it, you know. Okay, you belong. And as Jews, we behave in certain ways. How you believe, that's kind of, a lot of that's up to you. It's, you know, your own individual. There's certain core things that we believe as a people, but a lot of it, like you believe in God or not believe in God, that's your choice. That's your own individual wrestling with the universe. So that's why belief is last in those three things. So let's look at, let's see if we can figure out what religion is. Let's look at the reading that starts. What do we mean by religion?
Number 8.
Okay.
This is the next page.
It was right here. It's right there. What do we mean by? I'll bet
So
that's
we're on reading number 8 for those of you on Zoom.
Page 5.
Page 5.
Page 5.
Thank you. Somebody want to read the first paragraph?
What do we mean by religion? Religion is the search to discover what is ultimately meaningful in life and to find ways of expressing the resulting visions of the ultimate in behaviors and ideas.
I keep somebody read the second paragraph.
Taking his cue from the studies of social scientists, Kaplan understood religion as a group phenomenon rather than as an individual one. Kaplan did not agree with Alfred North Whitehead, who defined religion as what a person does with solitude. Although every individual arrives at his or her own religious vision and finds those elements in religious behavior that enhances his or her own life, this search always takes place within the context of a group.
Okay, then you can read the next paragraph. Let's read the last paragraph in that reading. In theistic religions. Can I get somebody to read?
In theistic religions, that source of wisdom is called God, and in traditional forms of Judaism, God reveals divine wisdom in the Torah. Thus, all aspects of a Jew's life can be sanctified because they can be viewed in terms of their divine source and connection. One recites a blessing of gratitude for each kind of food one eats. When one treats one's customers in accordance with the mitzvot, commandments, one is a partner with God in the redemption of the universe.
Okay.
I'm not sure I agree with the second. Just personal. I don't. That last line in the second paragraph. This search always takes place within the context of a group. I kind of think there are parts of the search that we do on our own and parts of the search that we do within the group. I don't think it always takes place within the group.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just me.
No, that's what belief, you know.
Yeah.
A lot of these quotes that you're reading was taken from Exploring Judaism, which I call the Little Red Book of Reconstructionism. I think it's available at Oseh. You can get it from Reconstructionist. Loading my whiteboard.
I think I have a copy of that at home.
I recommend it. It's a little dated, but it really outlines a lot of the concepts of Reconstructionism.
Mm-hmm. And there are probably copies in the room where you're sitting.
Yeah, there are.
I was looking. So that's what a library is for.
So God, to Kaplan, let's talk. So religion is kind of that search for, however we choose to define it, for sort of transcendental meaning in the universe, and different peoples express that in different ways. And as Jews, we have our own ways of expressing those religious concepts. Now let's talk about, now we've figured out what religion is, let's figure out what God is in the next
That's easy.
in the next 25 minutes or so. So,
in that regard,
God is the creative process, according to Kaplan. This is what Kaplan believed. The creative process that transforms the chaos of the universe into an organic whole. Let's read reading.
That was on page 1.
Let's read the reading that starts to become fully human, which I think is the first one, right?
That is reading 1, yes.
Okay.
But can I just say a word about that one sentence? God is the creative process that transforms chaos. That is almost verbatim and summarizes the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead. That in the previous reading they said that Kaplan disagreed with. He actually owed a huge debt to Alfred North Whitehead. The philosophical underpinnings of his God idea are Whiteheadian. So he had a huge, Alfred North Whitehead had a huge influence, and it was particularly on God as a creative process, which was an idea that Whitehead had at the center of his philosophy, which Kaplan was, definitely owed a huge amount to.
Agreed. Yep. I think the disagreement was the individual.
Yeah, individual versus
the group
on that point.
So we're going to struggle. We may not get to much more than this, but in the remaining time, but we're going to struggle with figuring out what to Kaplan God meant and what transnaturalism is, which is transnaturalism, as we'll find out, is one of the weird Reconstructionist concepts that has kind of gone out of favor now. But it was really big jargon in the Reconstructionist movement for a long time. So, it's really important to understand how Kaplan viewed God, because it really affected and shaped what the movement believed or put forward. But the movement is always, at least as long as I've been involved with it, puts this view forward as one alternative. It doesn't say, Reconstructionism doesn't and will not say you have to believe in God as the power that makes for salvation, or God, the transnatural stuff that we're going to read about, to be a Jew or to be Reconstructionist. But the incredible value of and power for me of the movement is it offers that as an alternative for people who really wrestle with a more traditional view of God, or even some of the mystical views of God. I had a lot of trouble dealing with this when I first became acquainted with Reconstructionism, because Reconstructionism was presented by a classical German rabbi, Rabbi Ludwig Nadelmann, who was he got up and he was stomping across the beam of Reconstructionism. God is the power that works for salvation in the universe. And God is a process. And we eat matzah on Passover. It could have been popcorn, but it wasn't. It was matzah.
I remember it well.
Yep. I actually did a satire Rabbi Nadelman at the next poem service. But he presented this as dogma, but it really isn't. It's and that was attractive. That view was really attractive to a lot of members of our synagogue who just couldn't buy into more traditional views of God. And for those of you who may be struggling with some of the more mystical, quote, woo-woo views of way of looking at the divine that Rabbi Dari and Josh offer, that's okay. I mean, we all have to come to terms with the universe in our own ways, and Reconstructionism offers this, what we're going to be talking about, as a really credible alternative. So,
I'm sorry if I may just
go ahead.
one thing. Hi, it's Lynn.
Hey, Lynn.
Owens, I'm new. I don't know too much about Judaism at all, or Reconstructionism, but what's interesting, I'm a psychologist, and from psychoanalytic thinking, which was really founded and developed by Jews at the turn of the last century. This is exactly the understanding of the child, that when the child is born, they're kind of psychotic. There's like chaos in the brain. They don't really know what's going on. It feels like chaos, and they scream, cry when they feel wet, when they feel cold, and then when they're comforted by the parent, all is right with the world. They calm down. This is good. And over time, they start to understand, okay, this is how it works. I'm cold, I get warm. I'm wet, I get dry. I'm hungry, I get fed. And just these two quotes, God is a creative process that transforms the chaos of the universe into an organic whole. The child, when I say psychotic, they're like fractured because they live in moments of time. They're not really an organic whole, where they're not sitting there and thinking like, oh, it's dark now, and oh, that lady's walking by. I'm talking about when they're really infants. And then the next one, nature is infinite chaos with all its evils forever being vanquished by creativity, which is God is infinite goodness. Luckily, if you have a good parent, this is what happens. The evils, like, the fractured thinking, the lack of understanding, the cold keeps coming, the wet keeps coming, the hunger keeps coming, and the good parent keeps coming and making everything good. It just really struck me that that this is how psychoanalytic thinking, which hasn't changed, we've evolved, newer theories, but psychoanalytic thinking about how we see the infant evolving, it hasn't really changed for more than 100 years. And this could also be used to describe how the parent makes a good, safe world for the infant.
Well, I'm sure. Thanks, Lynn. I'm sure Kaplan was really influenced by by that thinking because, again, that was part of. I'm sure that discussion was part of the environment that he was involved in when he formulated his ideas.
And conversely, Freud, who was also a scientist and very edgy. And I want to be very clear. A lot of things now, the thinking that you want to sleep with your parent, has been put to the wayside. But of course, a lot of, psychoanalytic thinking that we've come to understand that we have an unconscious and, stuff like that has not been thrown to the wayside. And
No, but it's interesting that you had Freud and then you have Jung who dealt in archetypes and dreams and the kind of the non-rational side of the whole thing. So, so let's look at a couple of these readings.
John, can I say something?
Yeah, Brian.
In Christianity, there was a great movement going on at this time called process theology.
Exactly.
That God is in process. And Charles Hartshorne and Norman Pittinger were the big proponents of it. And it had a big impact, particularly in Protestantism. And that whole thing that God is in process and we are coming along with God in that process.
Yeah, Kaplan was very much influenced by that. I mean, because he, grew up in that environment. So,
if anyone does want a copy of, that's what I did do my thesis on. So, if you're interested in that, I'm happy to give you copies of. It was published by the Reconstructionists, so it's in a published version. I can share.
Can you bring in a couple copies?
Sure.
Yeah,
that would be good.
So let's have somebody read the reading that starts "To Become Fully Human," which I think is on page 1, right?
I'll read that one.
Okay.
To become fully human, man has to achieve, on a self-conscious level, a process that operates on a non-conscious level in all living things, namely the synthesis of individuation and interaction, or of independence and interdependence. Accordingly, God, as the power that makes for salvation, is the cosmic process of organicity, which in subhuman creatures synthesizes individuation and interaction on an unconscious level, and in man on a conscious level. Do you want me to continue?
Yeah, keep going. The function
of ethical religion is to translate this idea of God into a way of life that would result in a successful synthesis. Ethical religion is thus a means of character building.
So those are the words of Mordecai Kaplan, which is a little.
He likes to repeat himself a lot.
Yeah. The cosmic process of organicity, which in subhuman creatures synthesize. Come on, Mordecai.
I almost get it.
Yeah, I know. It's like reading Joseph Conrad in some ways. It's like.
Right.
So the next reading, the next couple of readings capture, I think, what Kaplan's driving at here. Somebody want to read Nature is Infinite Chaos, with the one that the reading that Lynn referred to.
Nature is infinite chaos, with all its evils forever being vanquished by creativity, which is God as infinite goodness. That's all right.
And then Kaplan believed that the divine works through nature. Keep going.
Reading two.
Yeah.
Kaplan believed that the divine works through nature and human beings. He neither identified God with things in the world, natural, nor did he consider God to be beyond or detached from the world, supernatural. Therefore, Kaplan's theology came to be called transnational.
Transnatural.
I keep saying it. Transnatural. In this view? More?
Yeah, keep going.
In this view, there is more to the universe than the sum of its parts. In the organic interrelationship of all its processes, there are divine powers that truly exist apart from the empirically verifiable phenomena of nature. They are manifest, for example, in human self-consciousness. It takes faith in God to believe that the world is structured in a way that gives significance to the human quest for salvation. A transnaturalist, however, believes that God works through us rather than upon us. Thus, our sense of responsibility to bring divinity into the world is sustained by the faith that there is a power at the source of human endeavors. Huh. I almost get that.
I know. The thing about Kaplan is he's trying to intellectualize, and this is me speaking. He's trying to intellectualize something that essentially you can't rationally explain. But if to Kaplan it was really important, unlike ethical Judaism, to throw out any concept of, quote, God, because to him that concept was central to the Jewish religion. So he's trying to explain what that could mean to someone who has a rational approach, to as opposed to somebody who believes in, there's a divine being or entity that's outside of the universe that acts on the universe. So he's trying to explain, I believe it is essential for what it means to be Jewish, but I have to explain this concept in a way that rationally makes sense to me, is what's going on here.
Do you think when he talks about the word salvation, I'm hanging up on that a bit, I think probably because of the way Christians use it. Do you think he's talking about like wholeness there? Like we're striving for wholeness and God is helping us? I mean, we're working with God to strive for wholeness?
Yeah, salvation is very much in our heads as a Christian term. But to Kaplan and Bill, you might correct me, to Kaplan, salvation was more the striving to make the universe and ourselves better.
It's a striving for fulfillment. Absolutely, yeah, whether that's on a cosmic or whether it's the personal level.
So it isn't salvation in the sense of saving, it's salvation in the sense of actualizing all those good qualities in the universe to their greatest potential. And our good qualities to their greatest potential. That's what salvation is.
Is he defining it at the very top of this whole page as the synthesis of individuation and interaction? Is that
I
what
guess.
he means by salvation?
I guess. Yeah.
That's why it feels like wholeness to me.
Because he says to become fully human, we have to do that. You have to synthesize the independence with, being part of a greater whole, right? Well, that's part of it. The other part of it, though, is there are qualities that we define as good, and we'll get into this. We'll get into this some next time when we talk about predicate theology.
which is a really other revolutionary Reconstructionist concept. If you look at the Reconstructionist prayer book, there we have all these descriptions of what the divine is. You know, praised are you, the source, the lamp, the way, you're defining the merciful. We're defining these attributes, and in our religious concept, those attributes are good. So you have all these attributes that make the divine, and actualizing those attributes as much as you can is part of what salvation is, I think.
It almost sounds like reaching nirvana. I can't get that out of my head.
Well,
It's
nirvana
not,
is
though.
more a state of ecstatic being. I don't think he would go there. I don't think Kaplan would go there.
Okay.
Rabbi Josh might, but or Rabbi Daria, but I don't think. There's one reading. I'm not sure exactly which one it is. Let me see if I can. It's a reading that starts. Another commentator.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at
on page 2.
If you look at as radical modernists, Kaplan and Wyman took the scientific method, empirical fact, and prevailing forms of philosophy as their points of departure. They believed that their traditions had to be evaluated in the light of modern science, philosophy, psychology, and sociology. Nothing was to be adhered to unless its relevance could be made apparent. For them, God was imminent in cultural evolution, and society was progressively moving toward realization of that kingdom of God, even if such a goal might not be attained in the near future. So he very much believed in, Kaplan did, in progress through scientific method and rational thought. I think he moderated some of that belief later in life based on what he saw through World War II and the Holocaust. But it was very much an intellectual approach based on the contemporary values that he saw, and lived growing up in 1920s and 1930s intellectual America.
John, I have a question.
Yeah, Doris.
Okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to take your course is when I first started taking classes here in 2007, and I realized that I've been a Reconstructionist all my life and never knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm beginning to say I'm not sure I'm a Reconstructionist because of the renewal movement, which is too woo-woo for me, as you probably know. So I guess my question is, all of Reconstructionism going towards renewal, or will there be a schism in between the Reconstructionism that I understood to be when I first joined Oseh, or what? I have questions about the whole thing.
There is already as I explained in my when I talked about the Ira Eisenstein example with the angel services, that schism, quote unquote, has been around for a while between the head-centric and the kind of woo-woo heart-centric, and Reconstructionism as a whole has moved more toward the emotional heart-centric. But there are parts of Reconstructionism, there are congregations that are very much more rationally centered, much more discussion oriented, much less. The services are much less centered the way ours are. Rabbi Daria and Josh are kind of on the, and I'm using this term not pejoratively, the extreme end of the woo-woo spectrum. There are other rabbis who are much more intellectual, but you're not going to find too many contemporary Reconstructionist rabbis who are as intellectually based or rationally based as Kaplan and Eisenstein. It's because the movement has changed to try to grapple with how do we mediate between the heart and the head in our religious worship. So I would say you're still a Reconstructionist because but you may not believe or like some of the way that a given congregation expresses its Judaism. So there's a very wide range of belief and worship spectrum, I think, in Reconstructionist congregations, but there are also a lot of commonalities, and we'll get to those when we actually start looking at the specific movements and other stuff in our next class. But does that answer your question a little bit, Doris and Nikki?
Yeah, a little bit. And when Dan was struggling with the prayers to God, because I don't believe in God, but I never had a problem with the prayers because I think of that all as part of our story as Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what holds us together. And you can believe or not, but it's the sound of it, the rhythm of it, the comfort of it, even if you don't believe. So I never had a problem with it, but I totally accept my contradictions.
Well, and that's the beauty of being a Reconstructionist is you can accept those contradictions, you can be honest about them, and you can grapple with them. And I think the other movements are less honest in doing that. They fudge stuff a lot more, and aren't willing to come to terms as we are in Reconstructionists with, I don't believe in God, but I can pray to God because of my belief in what these prayers mean to me. To some, that may be intellectual dishonesty. To others, like you, it's I see this contradiction, but it doesn't. It's okay. It's okay. And the movement would say that it's okay to have those contradictions.
The issue comes with when there's a difference between the way the congregation wants to convey it as a congregation and
yes,
the
that's
leaders
true.
want to
That's right.
convey it.
That's right.
And you get this. There are times when it's dramatically just there's a schism there that I can't.
That's
I can't jump over.
That's a completely different issue. That's more how you're reacting to the congregation versus the movement, and that's a legitimate issue, obviously.
I think my hope was that Josh was bringing more the intellectual, less extreme side, and that people could gravitate towards one or the other depending on whether they wanted to do more head or more heart in their Judaism. That was what I was. But I'm not a Reconstructionist intellectual, so like the level I would need is not high. Like I just sit with Josh and say, "Help me figure out the Torah because I don't get why we care." That kind of thing.
To use the political term, maybe it's big tent Judaism.
Sure.
Yeah, but
with really solid canvas and pegs.
Right, but the tent can only go so far for
Right.
There
are still boundaries.
There's still boundaries.
Yeah, I got to run. I got to pick up Ari. But
okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, me too.
So I think we'll stop here. It's right now at 11:30. This was great, and I'm sorry for the reading mix-up. I don't know how that happened.
It made it fun.
No, it was wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so understanding, for help with the technology. I'm sure we'll have some of the same issues in the next class, but
next class is in a month.
Next class is
4
June
weeks.
4th.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You always do a great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Doris. I'm sorry for the delay, but it had to do with scheduling and what we could get. So, if you have any questions or comments, you all got stuff on my Recon class list. So if you want to, ask questions or discuss stuff, you have that email list.
I didn't sign up for this. Should I have done that?
Yeah.
They told us, and I love that they do this because religious school parents can't plan ahead because we have children. And they said, they're going to be doing this while you're here anyway. Go do it. So that's why I'm here.
If you just send me an email.
Okay.
And I'll put you on the Recon list.
Sounds good.
Again, if anybody has any questions or thoughts, happy to try to answer them online. And if not, next time we'll deal with predicate theology. We'll talk about the movements. And then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the contemporary Reconstructionist movement, what it is, what we've been doing, So you'll be experts in current Reconstructionist Judaism by the time our next class is over. So
Thank you, John.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Yep. And welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Yashkoach, Yochanan.
Welcome, Lynn, as a new person.
Yes, welcome.
It was great.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Oh, you're welcome, Val.
I
Glad it
still
worked.
don't know how it worked, but it worked. So bless you.
I'm going
All right.
to end the Zoom.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just leave meeting button. Cancel button. End meeting for